Hi, everybody. My name is Andrew Shikiar at FIDO Alliance. Thank you for joining us today for our first webinar of 2021. We thought it'd be good to hold kind of an open session to fill you all in on what FIDO has been up to. And then we're having our first ever Ask Us Anything. So it's actually a UA session, or Ask FIDO Anything session at the end of it. So a couple notes on this. Some housekeeping notes first. First of all of you are in listen-only mode. At the end, we have this open Q&A session, basically. So there's a question widget in On24 that you can ask questions to us, and David and I will answer them. We've inserted poll questions throughout, so we're eager for you to get feedback on a couple data points midstream as we're going along. The webinar is being recorded. That's always a common question is, can people get the recording? Yes, we'll post them as soon as they're ready. We'll let you know as soon as they're ready. And then last but not least, we have a survey at the end of the webinar. We want your feedback. So please take a couple minutes to finish the survey so we can make sure that this webinar program evolves to meet your needs. One last note on this. This is actually our first time using On24 as a webinar platform. So if there's any bumps along the way, that's why, and be patient with us should you hit those bumps. So again, my name is Andrew Shikiar, FIDO's Executive Director and Chief Marketing Officer. I'm joined by my colleague, David Turner. David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, I'm David Turner. So as Director of Standards Development for FIDO, I look after the overall standards development process, spec development process, and other technical aspects of FIDO's operations. I've been in the security, privacy, identity space for quite a number of years now, and here to teach you more about what we're doing and hope to answer your questions later.
Okay, great. So let's talk about what we've been up to. So first of all, to say it's been quite a year is an understatement. And I know we've all heard the 2020 jokes, how 2020 lasted 8 years, which is probably an understatement. But not only was it a busy year for the world at large, it's also another busy year for FIDO Alliance. Our goal as an organization is to do three things. One, we create technical specifications. Two, we run a certification program, a very successful certification program that helps build a B2B ecosystem. And then last but not least, we run a series of programs to drive education and adoption of FIDO technologies in the marketplace. And we made progress in all three of those, as we'll be detailing today. What's interesting, though, if you back up to just about a year ago today, so put yourself back to February 18th of 2020. Some of us were planning to maybe go to the RSA conference, which turned out to be the last industry event of on the planet, really. Other of us had our plans to go to Mobile World Congress canceled, but in general, in the background, one of the buzzwords was digital transformation. And in general, I think digital transformation, was a buzzword, but it means to bring your core processes online, right? Both your employee processes, your consumer processes, and everything else. So I think it's kind of a fancy term for it, but it was certainly an imperative nonetheless. And in fact, we co-authored a paper with the World Economic Forum on how FIDO and then passwordless authentication is critical to actually securing digital transformation. But even in that paper, is kind of a 5-year plan. I think most people thought of digital transformation as something that will attack in a piecemeal way over the next several years. Of course, then COVID hit, and the 5-year plan, turned into a 5-month plan. All of a sudden, you had workers who were stranded at home, more or less, who had to be able to securely access system resources. If you're a bank, all of a sudden, the 20% of your customer segment that insisted on banking in branch now had to move quickly to be, digital citizens. And these, really accelerated all these plans and made them, quite critical for companies to deploy. So that actually brings us to our first survey question, which is, it'd be great to understand, how did COVID-19 impact your company's authentication strategy? That may have been part of the digital transformation piece. It'd be great to understand how it's impacted your authentication strategy. So some of you already had a framework in place. Some were looking at new technologies to just delay or accelerate that, or perhaps for some of you, that had no impact on your implementation timeline. So please take a moment to fill out the survey, and we'll come back to the results in just a second. So as we were talking about, all of a sudden, people had to accelerate digital transformation, which created actually a massive opportunity for fishers, because you had a very high value target audience for them that was now doing things they may not have done before. So employees are a very valuable target, and trying to fish employees to get access to corporate networks, corporate resources, is a favorite activity of hackers. And as you can see in this chart here, provided by Google, it's little wonder that phishing went up. Whether it's employee attacks or fake banking attacks or other COVID-19 related scams, these are all things that accelerated during the pandemic. So let's take a look at our results. This looks like the survey worked, which is fantastic. It looks like many of you already had your authentication framework in place. Hopefully that was FIDO-centric. For other of you, it accelerated your implementation, which is no surprise. Some it delayed, and some it had no impact on. It's interesting, on the delayed piece of it. I know for a fact of several leading banks, for example, who had pretty aggressive plans to deploy FIDO that had to get pushed back a little bit because they had new imperatives, such as securing their customers are typically bank and branch. Okay, thanks for sharing that information with us. And I think all this points to authentication problems, right? So some of this is COVID related. As we talked about the spike in phishing, you see some of the data points here. 18 million COVID related phishing and malware attempts per day blocked by Google. But other data points are pre-existing or just ongoing, right? I think many of us know the old Verizon data breach statistics that over 80% of data breaches are caused by passwords or credentials. The fact of the matter is this is a problem that continues to grow and was only exacerbated by COVID. And fundamentally, this is because the password model is broken. Passwords are, from a user standpoint, I think we all understand they're clumsy and hard to remember. And even the usability is pretty not so great. So imagine, as we've all done, trying to type a password into a phone or, God forbid, a smart TV. So usability is bad, but the security is even worse, right? So the model is fundamentally broken. Of course, the traditional mechanism for protecting accounts is to layer up, right? Which is always good to do, right? So any form of 2FA is better than 1FA or one factor. But SMS and OTPs, still have a usability challenge. Now, at the end of the day, there's still a shared secret sitting on a server that can and will be stolen by a bad actor. So they don't protect you fully from phishing and other attacks. And for those of you newer to FIDO, of course, this is why FIDO was formed. This has been our imperative since day one, is to come up with a mechanism for user authentication that's stronger and simpler than passwords and OTPs. And fundamentally, what we're aiming to do is to shift the marketplace and shift the world from a model of authentication that's dependent on server-side shared secrets to one that is a little bit more decentralized in nature and allows users to authenticate locally to devices that are probably in their hands every day using asymmetric public key cryptography, which is definitely a mouthful, but it needs to be easy enough for users to just do automatically, which is why the user friendliness and the simplicity is very important. So FIDO presents a single gesture, possession-based, phishing-resistant approach to user authentication, whether that gesture is leveraging a device biometric or touching a security key. It's easy to use, and it's very scalable as well. FIDO Alliance is an alliance of over 250 companies worldwide. This is our updated board of directors. So there's some changes here from going into 2020. Some of the big additions, of course, is Apple. Apple joined FIDO at the start of 2020, which really helped accelerate further activities within the alliance, and I think demonstrated to the market at large a broad coalescence around FIDO as the body where companies work together to identify and address the best mechanisms for modern authentication. In addition to our board, we have hundreds of members at the sponsor level who really help build out our working groups and drive both the technical and adoption work that we're doing inside of FIDO Alliance. We have associate members who help build out the B2B ecosystem behind FIDO. And last but not least, we have liaison partners. We work with other standards bodies and .orgs and NGOs to address adjacent use cases and drive education in vertical markets and regional markets that we can't do alone. So a very high-level view, again, for anyone who's new to FIDO, of how FIDO works. And David will go into more depth on this in a little bit, or if you have any questions, we can also address that in the Q&A. Traditionally, when you log into a website, it looks something like this, right? You're sitting at your desk, and there's a server, and there's a simple back and forth. You place a secret on the server. If you answer correctly, you're logged in. And that model is broken for all the reasons we've already talked about. What FIDO does, our very core, is we insert the concept of an authenticator. And the authenticator is both a concept and a physical device. And I think one way to think about it is that it kind of mediates, if you will, the authentication process. When you enroll your account, for FIDO authentication, or you move to FIDO authentication, a unique key pair is created with a public key sitting on the server and a private key sitting on your authenticator, on your device, in your hands, basically. The public key, unlike a password, has no material value. That's why it's truly a public key. If someone takes this key, they can't reuse it in any shape or form. The private key is a sensitive part, and that's protected on your device, and can only be accessed or enabled or unlocked, however you want to see it, through your own verification. Right? So the verification, again, may be a biometric, or it could be just proving possession. Right? So it's the other form of authentication. And only after that verification happens can the authentication process move forward. And FIDO authentication itself represents kind of a challenge response mechanism, a dialogue, if you will, between the server, the authenticator, between the key pair itself. In that dialogue, a fair amount of metadata is embedded, and also unique attributes about the service and the server that needs to match just so with the authenticator and the private key for the authentication to be granted. A couple of things to highlight here is the possession-based nature of FIDO authentication and of the authenticator concept. That's what prevents scalable attacks, right? So for someone to actually hack into my account, they would need to come physically here and touch my security key, or use, I use Windows Hello, use my biometric, and that is not scalable, all right? And so certainly, you can have a brute force attack where you force someone to do something at gunpoint, but you can't do the remote attacks, which have really plagued the industry and led to so many data breaches and billions of credentials spilled onto the dark web. So I think it's also worth noting that FIDO historically has always aligned well with global policy. That's part of the benefit of being an open standard, is that these things are done in the open. It allows us to engage with different government bodies, regulatory bodies. This is particularly important in Europe, where FIDO complies with GDPR requirements. We have an elegant and simple way to address the SCA requirements of PSD2. Additionally, we engage with NGOs like the FATF, World Bank, and the Fiji Initiative. Likewise, we've made a lot of progress, engaging with governments as members. Right? So FIDO specifications reflect inputs from all sectors, including government. And we're fortunate to have governments. These are some of the members from Germany, the UK, Australia, the US, Korea, and there's others who have joined as well. And then last but not least, we're seeing, policy leading to deployments. So if you're a U.S. citizen, you can go to login.gov today and use your security key as a means of protecting yourself for logging in to U.S. government services. You can also, that's also empowered. I think ID.me is, one of the services that's used by many government agencies. That's also a FIDO certified service. Outside the U.S., we see adoption in the U.K., in Korea, Canada, Taiwan, and elsewhere. So in short, as we're coming back to the question of 2020 and review, I think it's fair to say that FIDO is poised to become part of the DNA of the web itself, right? Which is a pretty audacious thing to say, but what's that mean? What do you have to do to be part of the web's DNA? I think there's three key pieces. One is it needs to be an industry initiative, and there needs to be an industry standard, and you need to have some collaboration. And we certainly have that inside of FIDO Alliance. I think we have the right blend of companies who are, outside of FIDO, very, active competitors, cooperating, collaborating quite well in FIDO to drive this standardization. The second key aspect is you need to just be there, right? You need to have like a dial tone effect where FIDO is everywhere. And we are doing that at scale in FIDO Alliance today. We see FIDO shipping in every Windows PC, every Android 7 or later handset, and is supported in the vast majority of browsers, as we'll detail further in a few moments. And last but not least, this regulatory and government embrace is very important. And we'll dig into this a little bit further as well. But I think these are the three key things you need to have in place to be in position to be part of the web's DNA. And I think we've made great progress on that over the past year. So again, some highlights from 2020. We hit on some of these already, but a key one was Apple joining FIDO at the beginning of 2020, which has really rounded out our board of directors, and is related to an important proof point, which is further support in the on platforms. And David, do you want to talk through what this chart means and what it symbolizes?
Sure. So a couple important factors for primarily relying parties is understanding how broad the adoption and support is of the FIDO standards. As Andrew was saying, that to be part of the DNA, you really need to be ubiquitous. And so what we've been doing is helping by tracking the support of the FIDO2 standards in the various major browsers. And what the chart shows is where things are green, that means that it's already implemented, and in yellow that it's either partially implemented or it's in development in a pre-release version of the software. While there is certainly some red in the diagram, the good news is that first off, the Mac and iOS things essentially appeared last year. They weren't even on the chart at some point, at one point. And so the fact that they're there now means that we have support, broad support across Windows, Android, and iOS. In addition, most of the boxes have become largely green. So on the Windows support in particular, you'll notice there's strong support across all the major browsers, and pretty solid as well on Android. And of course, all of this continues to improve as different releases of the browsers come out. So it's all headed definitely in the right direction. Andrew?
Yep, absolutely. So of course, our hope is that over time this becomes broader and greener, which will certainly be the case in 2021. So all told, over 4 billion devices can now support FIDO authentication, which is a staggering number. But again, that it represents every Windows 10 PC, every Android 7 or higher device, and also the Mac devices and Apple devices that can now support FIDO authentication. Additionally, over 86% of browsers support FIDO through their supported WebAuthn. And this really answers a question that used to vex us, frankly, a couple of years ago, which was we'd get it from relying parties, which is, okay, well, if I deploy this, who can use it? Right? And that was the biggest challenge. And there's always a chicken and egg scenario in deploying any new network technology. And I think we've largely hatched the egg, if you will, now by addressing this endpoint piece. And as we move forward into 2021, we're seeing more and more companies deploying FIDO because they know that their consumers can use it. In fact, to that point, these are some of the companies that have deployed FIDO. Several of them spoke to our Authenticate conference. Other are just kind of companies out in the marketplace. This is a subset, but certainly a subset of companies that have deployed FIDO. But we're trying to highlight them here to show you, the breadth and depth of use cases and geographies for that are leveraging FIDO authentication. So ranging from the U.S. Army to social media outlets to retailers, mobile operators, and governments. you're really seeing every sector in every corner of the world, start to deploy FIDO to address a wide array of use cases. So the next poll question, and we talked a little about regulation before. How much do regulatory policies have on your security and identity technology choices? This is an important area for us, but be curious to understand how those of you in the audience look at regulation as you're deciding on your technologies. So please take a moment to fill that out. As you are filling the survey out, I think it's worth highlighting this ongoing trend of government recognition of FIDO. So I teased this before. Not only we're seeing governments deploy FIDO, but also a lot of citations of FIDO as a preferred mechanism by different regulatory bodies. So here in the U.S., CISA, the Cybersecurity Information Security Agency, cited FIDO and recommended FIDO as the preferred mechanism to harden and protect election campaigns and election infrastructure against hackers. And in fact, hopefully some of you were able to attend the policy summit that we held in conjunction with the ITRC and the Better Identity Coalition a few weeks back, where the chief security officer of the DNC cited FIDO as a reason why there were no hacks during the election. And in fact, I think his direct quote was, when it comes to MFA, there's FIDO 2 and there's everything else. And so they deployed thousands of security keys to different campaigns, staffers up and down the food chain to help protect against the hacks that plagued the 2016 election. So there certainly was controversy around the 2020 election, but campaign hacks were not one of them, largely due to the work from FIDO and the companies that participated in that effort. So let's look at how you look at regulatory policies. So yes, over 54% say that has a high impact on your decisioning when making technology choices, which makes a lot of sense. And that's one reason why we invest in this space and making sure that we're aligned with regulatory trends. So coming back to the premise, again, I think we're on our way to becoming part of the web's DNA. Work is still there to be done, but I think we have the foundation to truly be part of the core DNA of the web itself. So what's ahead? What are we working on now? Obviously, we're going to continue to round out the FIDO specifications. There will be some updates on that front to address added use cases. We could talk about that in Q&A in more specifics. But additionally, a lot of our focus is on driving adoption. Right? So the specifications today, they are mature, they're being used, and they're being driven in the marketplace. So we're doing a couple of things to help drive adoption. It'd be great to get your feedback on this. One thing we're doing is UX guidance. All right, so we hear from relying parties that part of their challenge in deploying is understanding how to deploy. So we have two things that we're working on to help people deploy more successfully. One is we have a technical document that's sitting in our GitHub repository, open for anyone's feedback, called How to FIDO, which is driven by some of our members who've done FIDO implementations, which is kind of an end-to-end guide for technologists really on how to implement FIDO. But on top of that, some of the hard questions are like, how do you actually drive a user to understand what's happening? How do you push them to enroll for FIDO so you can start decreasing their dependence on passwords? And there's a lot of really subtle design and user experience things that need to be considered as you're looking at that. So we are working on developing formal UX guidelines, starting by looking initially at the use case of regulated industry, so banking, using platform authenticators, which I think is one of the challenge points. So we're doing the testing now. We will have these guidelines out to the market in the first half of this year. And we think that coupled with the How to FIDO document will really help many of you and the broader kind of industry at large be successful in your FIDO deployments. Additionally, we continue to focus on case studies. For those of you who attended our Authenticate conference, we had, I think, over 20 different companies stand up. And these are submitted case studies to us who want to talk about and share their experiences deploying FIDO. the good and the bad, the challenges and the successes. And we'll continue to do that. All right. So if any of you have case studies, if any of you have deployed and are willing to share with the broader FIDO community, please let us know, because we'd love to engage with you on that. Beyond that, let's talk about what we're doing in adjacent work areas. So David, let me turn back to you, please.
Sure. So, of course, authentication has been our major focus to date. But what we've been looking at as well is how can we take the work that we've done and expand it to add more value to the market, to provide a more secure experience, to broaden the security experience. And there's two areas where we've started new efforts. The first is for identity verification assurance, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But the simple idea is finding a way to do not in person, or do identity verification that does not require an in-person event, which of course, as Andrew was talking about earlier, became much more important last year than it had been even to date. And then the other area that we've looked at is, or we've started work on, is in this area of IoT. I'm sure many of you have heard of all the disastrous situations where IoT devices were shipped, some cases without passwords at all, or with simple to hack default passwords. And so with the broad deployment and adoption IoT, we've taken our expertise in authentication and have brought it to the area of IoT authentication and deployment. So the work's been underway for about, on IoT authentication for about 2 years now. And we've got broad participation from the cloud service providers. Sorry, you've heard that. Cloud service providers, semiconductor manufacturers, and as well as users of the devices. The idea is that we built up a variety of use cases, and what we saw was that there were essentially two areas to focus on. One is the home scenario, where we have what's called a trusted installer. That's where you're installing a device in your own home or in your own environment, and so you can take a certain approach, like taking a picture of a QR code, that type of thing. Then there's the area of what we call the untrusted installer, which tends to appear more in large-scale commercial, industrial, manufacturing environments where you're deploying thousands and thousands of devices, and the person installing it is likely a contractor or someone who doesn't have the right authority to set up and configure the security attributes of a device. On our initial take, that's the area that FIDO has focused on, and our goal is to produce a specification that allows for rapid and secure onboarding of devices in this so-called untrusted environment. The specification that we've recently released in December, we've released it as its first review draft, so it's publicly available. People can take a look. The URL there is on the slide. Was based largely on an existing specification produced by Intel, which is called the Secure Device Onboarding Specification. Our version is called the FIDO Device Onboard Specification. And we've seen a lot of interest in it. There's work going on in the LF Edge forum under the Linux Foundation to develop a reference implementation. So we actually have code being developed in parallel with the specifications deployment, and we're looking forward to releasing that first final release early second quarter, let's say. The other area that we've been focusing on is the development of criteria for identity verification and binding. What we're not doing is defining how to do identity verification. That's a proprietary thing. It's where companies add value to a system. The problem is it's very hard to judge a given system to see how effective it is, and it's also hard to compare between systems to determine, is this one as good as that one? And there's a real demand for that. There's no bar for it. So in the same way that we developed biometrics testing metrics, we're doing the same for identity document verification. And in this case, we're defining things like acceptance rates, false acceptance rates, and so on, so that different implementations can be evaluated and compared. Those requirements have largely been developed, and so we're now in the next phase, which is the development of the actual certification program that can be deployed, or sorry, that can be used by the identity verification vendors to evaluate and certify their devices. So this we'll be establishing this as a FIDO certification mark. What we've just begun is the parallel effort, and in case people aren't realize, they may not be sure what I mean by identity verification. The idea is that if you're trying to prove who you are, whether it's for an initial registration or perhaps for an account recovery process, the idea is that you could take a picture of a driver's license, a passport, and you take a picture of it and send it to the relying party. They could then evaluate whether or not that is a legitimate document, whether it's fraudulent, whether it's been tampered with, and so on, and determine that yes, it is or it is not acceptable. So that's the phase that we've been focusing on is just so far is on the document verification. The next step is to evaluate the picture of the person that's on that ID. So is that face the same face of the person who's trying to, again, register or do account recovery? So in this case, in addition to taking a picture of the identity card or passport, you would also take a selfie of yourself, and both would be sent up for evaluation. And the idea is that the acceptance criteria for that would have to include things like liveness checking as well, to make sure that it's a real person, not a picture, and so on. So that's the work that's just begun. And then another piece of work that's being done now is to find a way to reliably and programmatically bind your assurance of an identity with the assurance of an authenticator. So to date, in general, when you use an authenticator, what it proves is very reliably that it is the same entity that registered that authenticator. In the same way that a username password authenticates that it's the same user. What it doesn't tell you is, was that David Turner that used that authenticator? And so if we've gone through a rigorous process of some sort to say, yes, we know who David Turner is, and we've gone through a rigorous process of knowing, yes, we know what that authenticator is, we want to be able to combine those to know that it's David Turner using that authenticator this time. So that's another stage of work that we're undertaking. Some of these will take a little time. Building certification requirements and such is a remarkably complex process. And of course, we have to be able to do this to meet the requirements around the world. As discussed earlier, there are a lot of regulatory issues that come into play here. Privacy, management of fraudulent documents, and so on. It's an interesting piece of work, but it's one that's in very high demand, and we have a lot of participation across the board, both from the companies who implement these systems, but also from the relying parties who are anxious to be able to take advantage of these new certified capabilities.
Great, thanks, David. Yeah, I think the last point's really important. As we talk more and more to companies that are seeking to deploy FIDO as part of their broader authentication identity strategy, this element, the a better mechanism for account onboarding, becomes absolutely critical. So coming back to what we're doing in the year ahead, Authenticate, some of this adoption-focused work and community-building work continues to be a focus for us. We had a very successful virtual conference in the fall. We had thousands of people register. I think over 1,500 people attend the Authenticate conference, which was 2 weeks of excellent content, top-notch content on all things authentication. So we will be doing this again in 2021. We're building on that to do a virtual set of summits and seminars. So we'll be doing quarterly virtual summits, which will be 2 to 3 hour topic-focused sessions, and then we'll have the physical conference this year. So we've all gotten accustomed to this way of communicating. We're hoping to do a little something in person, targeting a physical event in Seattle from October 18th to 20th, 2021. So mark your calendars, get your vaccines, and try to join us in person in October for Authenticate. So before we wrap up, let's ask another polling question. By what year do you think passwordless login experiences will be common for the majority of consumer-facing applications and websites? This is a question I get a lot when we do media and analyst interviews. I tend to say that, well, I've been saying it for the past 2 years. So I would say within 5 years, the majority of mainstream consumer sites and services will offer a passwordless option. And we believe the vast majority of those will leverage FIDO authentication. So it'd be great to get your feedback. It's going to be this year, 2023, 2025, later, or never. So please take a moment to fill that out. While we wrap up, the talking part of this, if you will. So we see FIDO as, the present and the future of user authentication, all forms of authentication, frankly. FIDO aims to be the industry's answer to the password question. We have a stronger, faster, kind of better means of providing user authentication with the specifications. It's widely supported, on a variety of devices and browsers and platforms. It's flexible enough to fit all use cases, and it's in market, right? So if this is all interesting to you, if you're just starting your FIDO journey, you can certainly write to the specifications. We also have a very robust ecosystem of vendors who have FIDO certified products that you can leverage and will interoperate with each other, which kind of future-proofs you for the long term. So let's look at what the survey says for a final question. So it looks like 72% of you say by 2025, actually that'd be 70, or actually around 76%, 77% say by 2025, this will be common. And the rest of you say later. So I think that's, pretty accurate. We are seeing more and more companies deploy FIDO, and I know of several in the works for 2021, and I think that 2023, 2025, certainly, we hope that the vast majority of applications will, leverage FIDO authentication. So with that, let's turn to the Ask Us Anything segment of today's conversation. So a couple notes. One, we want to see your questions. So please use a question box to ask those. I'll facilitate, David. I'll throw them your way or answer them myself. Secondly, we have a survey. I believe you can do the survey as you're doing the questions. So please do ask us, fill out the survey as you're listening to Q&A. Okay, so David, I'm going to bring the first one to you. I saw it before. All right, this question here. With public key cryptography, would FIDO be closer to EMV, card-present cryptograms, 3DS cryptograms, or something completely different?
So I can take that, but there were a couple before that.
Okay.
I'll just jump into that. So actually, FIDO has been working very closely with the EMVCo to find ways to, we've found a way so that FIDO authentication can be integrated with the 3DS process. And if someone has used FIDO to authenticate, then there is a payload that can be included in the 3DS messages. And that can then be used by the bank or the issuer to as a part of its risk evaluation process. So it's actually a parallel effort to what's going on with the EMVCo activities, but I always forget which the version numbers of the spec, but the work was done jointly between EMVCo members and FIDO members in parallel in both organizations so that the two technologies will work together.
Okay, great. Let's go with question number 3 here, David. Is there any approach on matching GDPR with the Cloud Act? Are you familiar with the Cloud Act? I'm not directly familiar.
I'm not directly familiar either, but what I'd say is to your point earlier, consideration of these sorts of policies and regulations are a part of our process. We spend a significant amount of money with legal teams to make sure that we remain compliant or we are in support of the various regulatory policies that are out there. Interestingly enough, it's become even more important now with the identity verification work. because now we get much closer into privacy related concerns and data retention issues and the like. But evaluating and monitoring those is a core part of the work that we do.
Okay. So we have two similar questions. One is, and I'll handle these, David. One is, how much adoption has there been by banks and financial services companies? And the other one is, I use services from several of the companies listed, but I'm not aware of how to use FIDO with them. So to the first point, where's FIDO in the financial space? Several companies have deployed FIDO and don't talk about it publicly. Others have, other major banks are actively working on their deployments, and I believe we'll see those this year. And I'm talking about in the U.S. Outside of the U.S., we've seen major consumer banks in China, in Korea, and Japan all deploy FIDO for user authentication. In Europe, we've seen Santander deploy as well, and there's others that are in the works. So I think we'll see more of these companies deploying and publicly deploying FIDO and using FIDO in 2021. Frankly, part of what's held some back, two things held some of them back. One is COVID-19, delayed some deployment plans, and two is this usability work we're doing. So there's significant interest in figuring out how to optimize the UX for deploying FIDO at scale to consumers, particularly on the desktop. On the mobile device, a lot of banks have used the UAF, right, the biometric option for native apps already, and that's already in market. The other question is, how do I, some of the companies listed are deploying FIDO, but it's not readily apparent. Sometimes it's behind the scenes, and sometimes, depending on your use case and where they have deployed, it may not be ready yet, for the consumer audience.
I'll just add to that. There's some examples like eBay who have added the feature, which we think is great, but they haven't necessarily broadcast it. Because they're trying to evaluate it as they deploy it, and so the features are there. Particularly, I think on Windows they've added support, and so it's better for them to have it start up more slowly so they can evaluate, make sure that the usability is consistent with their desired user experience.
Yeah, in fact, eBay is a great example, David. Thanks for raising that. So eBay actually has really been aggressive in their FIDO implementation, and we'll be publishing a case study in the next couple of days, actually. So today, if any of you have eBay accounts and you're on a Windows machine or a Mac, you come with an updated browser, they give you the option of using your platform authenticator rather than your password. All right, so you log in, and it prompts you to use Windows Hello, for example, and then every time you log in thereafter, you can use your platform authenticator rather than a password. Part of our work with the UX piece is to help find ways for RPs to intuitively start introducing the FIDO brand into that equation. So our hope is that later on this year, not only will you be visiting sites that support FIDO, you'll know you're using FIDO through something that they're communicating to you. Moving forward to your question, the next question, I assume there's white papers from working groups evolving these protocols and technologies. Can people participate or at least read up on what's happening? Is there a Slack community for FIDO Alliance? So let's talk about that. FIDO has a couple types of working groups. We have technical working groups that largely are focused on building the specifications. We have deployment working groups which write white papers based on best practices for how to deploy FIDO. And so I'd encourage you, I can find some URLs for you to look at we have a series focused on the enterprise from our enterprise deployment working group, which is has a very easy to digest, practical series of papers focused on why to use FIDO2 in the enterprise. So I'd encourage you to check that out. Participation in FIDO itself is limited to company members. We have different levels of membership. If you're interested, we could certainly explore that. Is there a community for FIDO Alliance? So a couple of resources. So one, we have a FIDO dev mail list, which I'd encourage you to tap into. If I can find the chat box, I'll put that in here. And then, David, do you want to talk about the WebAuthn community group? What we're doing there at W3C?
Sure. So in addition to the FIDO Dev Google group for developer discussion, of course, we also have our Twitter account. There's the W3C has created a WebAuthn adoption community group, which is open to anybody for participation. And its primary intent is to promote adoption, and it has participations from both the technology developers as well as relying parties. It's where we gather information and provide feedback on some of the user experience issues that Andrew mentioned, some of the adoption challenges that people may face, and it's evolving, but it's providing an increased amount of information to the developer community.
So I think hopefully that helps you. And if I was unable to put the URL into the public chat window for some reason, but if you visit the FIDO Alliance website, you'll see a link to the FIDO Dev group, which is a really good community for answering and getting community support on things.
Let me try and, I'm going to paste it in the answer box.
Oh, there you go. That works also.
Use the technology. So
mobile driver's license question.
Yeah, I can take that.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Yeah, so the short answer is I'll say yes. We're not directly working with Florida, and this relates to question number 11 as well, working with real IDs, but also mobile driver's licenses. There is work, the mobile driver's license work is being, part of it's being standardized within ISO, and there is an effort underway so that those specifications will directly reference FIDO as an authentication mechanism as a part of their own protocol flows. So there is work underway to formalize the use of FIDO in conjunction with those identity systems. Timing is unclear, largely because I'm not directly involved in that working group or subcommittee. It's for those who are ISO aware, it's ISO JTC1 SC 17. And if you need more information, you can ping me after, and I can provide some more details on that. But there's a couple of specifications that are being developed right now to help tie those things together.
Okay, I have a question on how to get in touch with us. You can email David or myself. It's firstname@fidoalliance.org. You can also email info@fidoalliance.org. It's kind of a catch-all, if you will. David, I'm looking at time, so I'm going to skip through a couple of these here. I'm working bottom to up. Does FIDO hold patents? No, FIDO does not hold patents. There's IPR policy for contributing into FIDO Alliance that if you join as a member, we're happy to share more details. But in general, things are done in a royalty-free basis inside the Alliance. Where can one find the vendor list? So if you visit the website, and again, I'm sorry I can't push this URL directly in here, but I will answer this question later. So I'll answer to this. The person who asked the question, I'll put the URL in. But if you go to the FIDO website and you go to FIDO Certified, we have a list of FIDO certified products. And it's a table, it's a live table. You can search by specification type and authenticator level to find the product set.
I want to quickly jump in on question 15, which is about decentralized identity.
Yeah.
Just want to point out that our technology, what FIDO does, is complementary to the work being done on decentralized identity. And at this point, there's no direct collaboration between them, although we respectively know each other's community. In fact, there's a lot of overlap in the actual people who are participating in both. But the goal is that at some point in the future, we'd be able to directly demonstrate how the two technologies can be used in conjunction with each other. FIDO is not an identity solution, and decentralized identity is not an authentication solution per se, although there could be authentication mechanisms described with it. So the goal will be, as we go forward, to find a way of to develop a way so that the technologies are complementary to each other directly.
Yeah, that's a common question we get. So here's a good one we get a lot. How do you see the success of smartphones compared to hardware keys? And my answer to that is yes. I think there's a use case for both of them. We've seen keys deployed widely in the enterprise. I don't think we'll see those reach consumer scale just because of the nature of that. But I think that's where things like platform authenticators really come into play. So there's use cases for both, and security keys bring a lot of benefits as far as being able to use that to log in between devices, across devices, and bring that with you as a backup key. We always recommend deploying twice. Whereas smartphones, bring the promise of FIDO to everybody, and not just smartphones, but embedded authenticators in devices. Brings the FIDO to everyone. The other use case that we're working on, pardon my dog, is the smartphone as security key. And so Google's done some initial work in this where you can actually use your iPhone or your Android phone as a key to log on to Google services. We are working inside the Alliance to bring that use case broader across services so that your phone itself can be a roaming authenticator across devices and across logins. So I think both have potential and will continue to grow across use cases, along with smart cards and card type devices. One of the cooler implementations I've seen from a couple of our security key vendors is kind of the catch-all access card, which is a multifunction card that gets you in the door. So for physical security, it could be used as a FIDO security key on your PC and as a name badge too. So I think you'll continue to see innovation in this space. And in fact, one thing that has constantly surprised me is how much innovation we see in the hardware key space around FIDO authentication.
I jumped in on 21. That's about IoT.
Yep.
So FIDO's role with IoT, in at least our first iteration, is on the initial device authentication for the onboard process. Ongoing authentication with the device will depend on the cloud service provider's solution and whatever other technologies the devices use. So the FIDO's position right now is that initial authentication when the device goes live to begin with. The rest of the authentication cycle is largely addressed by the solutions that are out there today. So it's less likely that we'll get into that space.
Question, are we actually working with the EMVCo and biometric authentication? So I think, David, you addressed that. I mean, talking about some of the joint work that we have a liaison partnership with the EMVCo, and we're working on joint use cases on kind of optimizing 3DS flows, if you will, with FIDO and with W3C with the web payments work. So that's an active engagement we certainly do have there, and we value that partnership with them. Question around how's dialogue with NIST going around FIDO2 and the AL3? Great question. We're very fortunate to have NIST as an active member and participant inside of FIDO Alliance. As many of you may know, NIST is updating its digital identity guidelines, so there will be 863-4, and we've given feedback on that and hope to see even more explicit references to how FIDO can address the higher levels of assurance in those outputs. Question 19. By the way, only David and I see the question number, so it makes sense to the two of us and probably not the rest of you. Do biometrics like facial recognition get stored centrally or locally in the FIDO model? Great question. FIDO is consistent, and our FIDO model leaves everything on the device, right? And I think this is a really important point for people to consider as you look at how to use biometrics. We believe that match on server of anything is a high risk activity. For the same reason we don't want to have passwords on servers, we most certainly don't want to have biometrics on servers. If you lose your password, you can always change your password. You can't change your biometric. This is also something called out in GDPR. Biometrics are treated as sensitive data and should, basically not be stored on server if except for, some circumstances. FIDO feels the same way and keeps all data, all authentication data, local on your device. Good question about liveness factors. David, do you want to talk a little bit about the biometric component certification program, what we're doing there?
Sure. So yeah, liveness is hard. And yes, there's a lot of ways to fake it. And that's why we separated it out as we defined requirements for certification, because it is a whole challenge unto itself. So the whole problem of matching a selfie to a picture of a picture is one problem in and of itself. And just being able to, do the recognition and dealing with all the variations of quality and whatnot is a challenge. The liveness is in fact a big challenge on its own. And we've only just begun to try and define the requirements. Now, again, we're not defining how this is done. What we'll be defining is ways of evaluating the quality of the work done. And if you're interested, we already have biometric certification testing that will give you a sense of how we look at the problem and how we evaluate things. So I don't have a better answer than that now, partly because we're just starting, but we do recognize that it is a critical part of doing the selfie matching work.
Okay. There's a related question on the reliability of facial biometrics and diversity issues. These are things that are also being contemplated in that effort with the biometric component certification program. Question here, do you have plans to integrate FIDO to Windows OS as 2FA? When can it be expected? Yes, I mean, Microsoft's one of the most critical contributors to FIDO Alliance and has built FIDO 2 into Windows Hello, which is in Windows 10. So any Windows 10 PC has Windows Hello built into it. You can leverage a platform authenticator or a PIN rather than a password. Additionally, Microsoft's done a great job integrating FIDO into Azure AD, which allows companies to quickly kind of spin up a FIDO implementation themselves. So there's extensive integration with FIDO and Windows thanks to the good efforts from Microsoft. And I'm sorry, my dog's making a cameo right now. That was not planned. I think we're coming towards the end here. Couple questions. Is there an exemplar website? So I think this is is there a reference implementation? I want to come back to this. There was I mentioned the user testing that we're doing. This is going to be done on a live website. So our hope is that these user guidelines also include, he's our expert, also include the guidelines will be based on testing that we're doing. At the end of all this work, we'll have the How to FIDO document, we'll have the guidelines, and also the testing website that we use will be stood up as a reference implementation for people to look at. So again, our goal is to provide these resources to all of you to help you be more successful in your own implementations. So look, that brings us to the top of the hour. Please take a moment to fill out the survey. I'd love to hear whether or not this sort of open session is of value to you all. If so, we can have it more often on different topics, just kind of have open office hours. We want to make sure that our webinar program is of value to the community. So please take a moment to give us feedback. If you have more questions, you can email us at info@fidoalliance.org. And with that, let's go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all for attending today. Thank you, David, for doing this with me. And we'll look forward to seeing you all soon on a future FIDO webinar.
Thank you, everyone.